Hello, and welcome to another lesson from Level Up Mathematics. In today's lesson, we will be learning to solve all types of quadratic equations, and then we'll learn how to choose the most efficient method. So in example 1, we're going to review all of the different methods we've learned to solve, and then in example 2, we'll learn how to choose the most efficient method for each equation. So problem A says solve 2x plus 1 quantity squared is equal to 25 using the square root method. So let me write my original problem down here. We have 2x plus 1 quantity squared equals 25. So to solve this by the square root method, all I have to do is take the square root of both sides. And that gives me 2x plus 1 equals plus or minus 5. Now I'm going to break this apart into two equations. 2x plus 1 equals 5, and 2x plus 1 equals negative 5. So on the first equation, subtract 1 to get 2x equals 4. Divide by 2 to get x equals 2. On our second equation, subtract 1 to get 2x equals negative 6. Divide by 2 to get x equals negative 3. So our solution set here is 2 comma negative 3. All right, problem B. If function g is defined by g of x equals 3x squared minus 2x minus 5, use factoring to find the solutions to g of x equals 0. So here's what this means. They want us to plug in a 0 for g of x. So our resulting equation is 3x squared minus 2x minus 5 equals 0. Now I'm going to be using the AC method for factoring. So for my AC, A is 3, C is negative 5. The product of 3 and negative 5 is negative 15. I'm going to make a list of factors, ignoring the negative. 115, 3, 5. Then you ask yourself, which of these factor pairs could you use to get negative 2? Well, hopefully you said you'd have to use the 3 and the 5, and you'd have to make the 5 negative. So I'm going to rewrite this expression as 3x squared, and I'm going to split negative 2x into positive 3x and negative 5x. And then the minus 5 stays the same. Now, take out the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor of 3x squared plus 3x is 3x. 3x squared divided by 3x is x. 3x divided by 3x is 1. The greatest common factor of negative 5x and negative 5 is negative 5. Negative 5x divided by negative 5 is x, and negative 5 divided by negative 5 is positive 1. Now take your outsiders, put them in one parenthesis, and then write down one of your twinsies, and then set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So here 3x would equal 5, therefore x would equal 5 over 3. Over here, x would equal negative 1. So my solution set is 5/3 and negative 1. All right, problem C. Function k is defined as k of x equals x squared plus 32x plus 248. Use completing the square to find the solutions to k of x equals 0. So what they're wanting me to do is put a 0 in for the kx. So when I do that, I would get the equation x squared plus 32x plus 248 equals 0. Now, when we're solving by completing the square, we want to move the constant term to the right side. So this will be x squared plus 32x equals negative 248. Then you want to make a perfect square trinomial on the left side. So to do that, I'll put x squared plus 32x plus blank equals negative 248 plus blank. Now, let me review how to find the number that completes the square. You take the b term, 32, divide it by 2, and square it. So 32 divided by 2 is 16, and 16 squared is 256. So you're going to add that to both sides. Now, once you have a perfect square trinomial, now you can factor it. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 256 is 16. And then negative 248 plus 256 would be positive 8. Now we can take the square root of both sides. So x plus 16 equals, now we need to simplify square root 8. It would simplify to square root 4 times square root 2. The square root of 4 is 2. So it's going to simplify to plus or minus 2 square root 2. Now just subtract 16 from both sides. So negative 16 plus or minus 2 square root 2. Excuse me, I just noticed I had a mistake right there. So final answer. All right, problem D. Use the quadratic formula to find the solution set to 2x squared plus 15 equals negative 11x. So the first thing I need to do is make this equation equal to 0 by adding 11x. So I'm going to get 2x squared plus 11x plus 15 equals 0. So my A is 2, B is 11, and C is positive 15. Now I'm going to take the opposite of B, plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A, and then I'll plug everything in. So the first two parentheses are my B value, which is 11, and then A, which is 2, C, which is 15, and A, which is 2. So this would be negative 11 plus or minus empty square root over 2 times 2, which is 4. Now let's see what goes under my square root. 11 squared minus 4 parenthesis 2 parenthesis 15, and that gives me 1. So the square root of 1 is a perfect square. So this would be negative 11 plus 1 over 4, or negative 11 minus 1 over 4. So negative 11 plus 1 is negative 10 over 4, and negative 10 over 4 reduces to negative 5 over 2. Negative 11 minus 1 is negative 12. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. So there's your solution set. Now, these are the 4 ways you've learned to solve the quadratic equations. Let's talk now about choosing the best method. So for factoring, you use whenever the equation is factorable. Not all equations will factor. It's easier when your A value is equal to 1. Okay. To solve by square roots, you use whenever the B term is missing, the bx term was missing. So for example, if I had 4x squared equals 16, the bx term is missing, so that would be a perfect time to use square roots. Or if you have something like this, x plus a quantity squared equals b. that would be another opportunity to use the square root method. For completing the square, it's much easier to solve when a equals 1 and the b term is even. So, for example, if I had x squared, a term is 1, plus 6x, the b term is even, plus 8 equals 0, that would be a really easy equation to solve by completing the square. The a is 1, the b is even. Now, quadratic formula works on everything, but it's easiest to use when you can easily identify a, b, and c. So if it's something like this, 5x squared plus 2x minus 5, it's easy to identify a, b, and c there, so quadratic formula may be the easiest method to solve that. Now, in example 2, it says choose the best method and then solve. So I have 2 times the quantity, x minus 7 squared, equals 32. So let me go back and look at my box here. I'm going to use square roots because it's easy to use when you have x plus a quantity squared equals b. Now, before I can solve by square roots, I need to remove that 2. So I'm going to divide this side by 2 and this side by 2. So now I have isolated the x squared term, and I can take the square roots. So square root of this side, square root of this side. So x minus 7 equals plus or minus 4. Now add 7. So this will be 7 plus 4, 11. 7 minus 4, 3. Now, we solved by the square root method. We could have used quadratic formula, but it would have taken much longer. So that square root method was the most efficient method. So I'm going to check that we use square root method as our most efficient method. All right, problem B. We have x squared plus 9x minus 2. Minus 22 is equal to 0. Now, I notice that the a value is 1 and the b value is odd. So I do not want to use completing the square, and I cannot solve it by the square root method. So I could either use factoring or quadratic formula. In this particular problem, the numbers are pretty small, so I'm going to use factoring. All right, so if I get AC 1 times negative 22, my factors of 1 and 22 are 1 times 22 and 2 times 11. Well, out of those factors, the only thing that'll give me positive 9 is the 2 and the 11. 11 if I make the 2 negative. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared plus 2x, minus 2x plus 11x minus 22 equals 0. Now take out the common factor. Common factor of x squared minus 2x is x. That would leave me x minus 2. Common factor of 11x minus 22 is positive 11. When I divide that out, I get x minus 2. So put the outsiders, x plus 11, together, and put the twinsies together, x minus 2. So when I solve that, x would equal negative 11, x would equal positive 2. Factoring ended up being a very efficient method for solving that problem. All right, problem C. We have 2x squared plus 8x plus 10 is equal to 3. Now here the value of a is 2, so I probably wouldn't want to use completing the square. I also cannot solve it by the square root property, so I'm going to either use factoring or quadratic formula. And since I used factoring on the last one, I'm going to choose quadratic formula. So to solve by quadratic formula, the right side must equal 0. So I want a minus 3 here and here. So that would give me 2x x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0. So my A is 2, B is 8, C is 7. All right, so I want opposite of B, plus or minus square root of B squared, or 8 squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times 8. So the opposite of positive 8 is negative 8, plus or minus empty radical, over 2 times 2, which is 4. Now let's see what goes in that radical. Parenthesis 8, parenthesis squared, minus 4, parenthesis 2, parenthesis 7. All right, square root 8. Now, I already know that square root 8 would simplify to square root 4 times square root 2, which is 2 square root 2. So when I simplify this, I'm getting negative 8 plus or minus 2 square root 2 divided by 4. Now, you can leave it like that, but your teacher may want you to simplify this further because each of these has a common factor of 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So to simplify this, I would say negative 4 plus or minus square root 2 over 2. All right, D, we have x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 73. Now, our first term is 1. Our middle term is even. So this is a really good candidate for completing the square. So to complete the square, you want to rewrite this as x squared minus 6x equals, let's see, 73 minus 7, 66. Then you want to make a perfect square trinomial and add that number to both sides. So to make a perfect square trinomial, you take your middle term, divide it by 2, and square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So put a 9 here and a 9 here. Now factor that to x minus 3 parentheses squared. And then 66 plus 9 equals 75. Now square root both sides. So that would leave me x minus 3 equals, the square root 75 would simplify to square root 25 times square root 3, or 5 square root 3. So plus or minus 5 square root 3. And then add 3 to both sides. Okay. And that concludes today's lesson, choosing the best method for solving quadratic equations.